Have you heard that Michael Burry correctly forecast the housing and financial market crashes in 2008 and 2009? He had to spend $1 million on legal bills to protect himself after the authorities hounded him. His efforts to inform millions of Americans about the impending dangers went unappreciated. Therefore, he had to endure both financial and mental pain. Now, though I have the same impression that no one is paying attention to Michael Burry's warnings that the US world economies are once again in grave danger. No matter whether or not all analysts concur that the United States economy is entering a recession, one thing is for sure: the businesses and stock markets are illogical and doomed for the near future. Therefore, follow along as I reveal what Michael Burry recently said and what you can anticipate for your assets in 2023 or even beyond. You may learn about investing and how to make the best financial decisions for your life on Investor Facts. Make sure you click the subscription button and enable the notification bell if you haven't already. Share, like, and comment. Michael Burry has maintained his Twitter spree over the past few weeks, yet strangely, it appears that he's not removing his tweets any longer, at least for the time being. This makes it much easier for us to keep up with him now. Without digressing, Burry gave us an update on the economic climate that will affect all of us over the next few years on January 2nd. And here's what he had to say. Apparently, inflation peaked. However, it is not the cycle's last peak. The CPI will probably decline, maybe even turn negative, in the second half of 2023, and the US will most likely be in a recession by any standard. The Fed will reduce, but the government will increase, and there will be another spike in inflation. It's not difficult. Burry usually makes forecasts with such confidence, which always makes me laugh. Come on, folks, this isn't that difficult. Of course, this will occur. I must, however, apologize to Michael. Since Burry basically believes that the present decline in inflation we're witnessing is only the conclusion of the first wave of inflation, and over the course of the next several years, we'll probably see the other waves of inflation, the Federal Reserve won't have the motivation to keep interest rates high. This may cause a recession by keeping interest rates high. It will permanently crush inflation. Given that it would be the exact same situation that occurred in the 1970s, this hypothetical predicament transmits information that sends chills down the spine of investors. But first, some background information to help you figure out what the hell is going on. Over the past few years, supply chain problems and money printing have combined to drive inflation sky high, reaching its highest level in 40 years. Due to this, the Federal Reserve was compelled to intervene and raise interest rates in order to slow the economy, restrict access to credit for individuals and businesses, and curb consumer spending. History has shown us that the best course of action is to climb the ladder, and in 2022, the Fed raised interest rates from essentially 0 to around 4%. As a result, inflation is currently on the decline. So here's the problem. Even though interest rates are now not very high, they are predicted to rise during 2023, and people do suffer when rates are high. High interest rates have an adverse effect on the general populace, in the debts like personal loans and mortgages eat away at their expendable cash until there is none left over for other expenses. Therefore, keeping interest rates high for an extended period of time is clearly not the popular choice. As a result, the people inevitably exert significant political pressure on the government to cut interest rates. And anyway, government aims to make people happy, and lower interest rates improve the mood of individuals. In addition, the president actually nominates the Federal Reserve Chair. Therefore, there is intense political pressure to reduce interest rates. But if this happens too soon, inflation may spike again. After all the financial suffering you caused while attempting to stop inflation or through poor luck, the issue still persists, and you find yourself back where you started. In the 1970s, precisely this occurred. In 1970, inflation slowly surpassed 5%, and the federal funds rate was at 9%. Suddenly, as luck would have it, inflation dropped back at 3%. After the Fed lowered interest rates, inflation accelerated once more and reached 11% in 1974, at which point rates were once again raised, this time to 13%. Nevertheless, inflation decreased to 6% in 1976, and the Fed loosened up once more, declaring that inflation was now receding and lowering interest rates back to 5%. However, inflation soared to 14% in 1980 far too quickly, necessitating the intervention of Paul Volcker, who raised interest rates to 20%. Sadly, it will take a severe recession in the United States before inflation is fully defeated. That is what Michael Burry expected the US to experience during the following few years. He predicts that history will repeat because he doesn't think we've learned our lesson. Inflation is inevitable. Rates will continue to be high. A recession will hit the US. There will be suffering. Politics will exert pressure on the Fed to cut interest rates and boost the economy, which will start the next round of inflation. With such an outrageous forecast, one might assume Burry is a bit of a wild cannon. He's not the first well-known mega investor to voice his opinion, which is fascinating. Charlie Munger is another well-known individual who you undoubtedly know and who shares the view of the Fed's willpower will not be sufficient to combat inflation. When Volcker raised the prime rate to 20% after the 1970s, and the government was only receiving 15% of its government bonds, Charlie said it was a terrible recession. It's fascinating that Michael Burry and Charlie Munger essentially agree on this method of reasoning. They believe that the political climate that enabled Volcker to take severe measures and control inflation in the 1970s may not exist today. Until, of course, the Fed becomes stuck in a cycle of trying to decrease the interest rates only to be obliged to raise them again, during which time inflation could fluctuate. In fact, Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve have emphasized their commitment to preventing this on multiple occasions. Jerome Powell has recognized the inflation fluctuations of the 1970s in a few news appearances and emphasized that the Fed is dedicated to ensuring that a similar situation does not arise this time. According to the FOMC news conference, price stability is the Federal Reserve's job and serves as the base of our economy. Our policy interest rates was increased by a half percentage point today by the FOMC. We remain convinced that further hikes will be necessary to achieve a monetary policy posture that is sufficiently tight to eventually bring inflation back to 2%. My coworkers and I are well aware of the considerable hardship brought on by high inflation because it reduces purchasing power, particularly for those who are least able to pay the increasing prices of necessities such as food, shelter, and transportation. The historical evidence strongly advises against easing policy too soon. We will not budge until the project is completed. The historical evidence clearly advises against premature policy easing is the key quote for me. There is no doubt that the Federal Reserve is well aware of everything that occurred during the 1970s and claims that they are determined not to repeat the same mistakes. We will keep going until the work is done. Michael Burry's viewpoint is still very relevant since, despite what the Fed may be saying at the moment, Charlie Munger and Michael Burry agree that it is unclear whether the Fed will follow through on its promises. The Fed seeks to reduce inflation to between 2 and 3%. That would be fantastic. Although, if interest rates must keep rising and they trigger a horrible recession, many Americans will lose their jobs and be unable to pay their mortgages. Therefore, that is Michael Burry's most recent forecast, and it is undeniably consistent with the other tweets. When the stock market had dropped 20% by the end of June, Burry stated that he believes we are still far from finished. No, we have not struck the bottom yet, he replied in response on September 7th, and he earlier predicted that the S&P 500 would fall underneath the 2020 COVID low points. There is no question that he remains extremely pessimistic for the upcoming several years, and it appears that his lack of trust in the Federal Reserve is the main cause of that. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, Please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends and see more of our videos on your homepage.